Welcome to the channel. This video is an introduction for a new irregular series where we will be playing a no. Welcome to the channel. This video is going to be an introduction to a new irregular series for Workers and Resources Soviet Republic called Four Corners 1908. This video is going to consist of 3 parts. In the first part, I'm just going to talk about the reasons for making this series and what the objectives are going to be. In the second part, we're going to go through the new game setup process. And then in the last part, I will give you a tour of the map, talk about the starting location, and then crystallize some of the objectives. Now, before we move on, I'd like to emphasize the fact that there is no gameplay in this video. So if you want to see the gameplay, what I recommend is you jump to the part 1 video for this series, which will be released at exactly the same time as this video. If you decided to stay, welcome. And I suppose I better start by explaining why I'm making this series. And it is the result of a process that started a couple of months ago when I had someone post a comment talking about an early start. And that resulted in me starting the 7 Crosses series, which is currently still going on, and in 1947. But it didn't stop there, is probably the honest way to say it. I started looking more and more into the really early starts, and then Novu posted a 1910 Siberia map, which really fascinated me, and I thought, yeah, I could really do this. And what I did is I did quite a lot of test play on his map, and that opened up a whole range of new ideas on how to play the game, because what became apparent was that the normal game rules and buildings didn't fit with an early start. So you have, effectively, if you're starting early, you've got to play outside the normal game rules. Hard mode didn't fit. I did try it and it just blew up in my face, to be honest. And so that then took me into the realm of role play and just using an early start to get down into the base mechanics of the game. And that is what this series is going to be about. We're going to be role-playing, growing a remote village in, well, some parts, say Siberia, for example, and taking that village through the great historical events of the Soviet Republic. And if you're not sure what these historical events are, we'll be starting in 1908. And of course, in 1914, the Great War starts, which runs, I think, for the Soviet Union to 1917, and then of course after that there is the Russian Revolution, which goes until 1923. Then in 1923 the communists finally take power, but there's a period after that when remote villages like we're going to be starting in would not feel the effects of the Communist Party because the country was very big. And then moving on, there's the Second World War, 1945, and the potential devastation and disruption to the Soviet economy caused by the invasion of Germany as they pushed towards Moscow. And of course the Second World War came to an end in 1945. And then, of course, we then moved into the Cold War, where effectively the Eastern Bloc were self-contained and almost isolated from the West. So there was very little trade across the border and life was pretty tough. And then, of course, in 1980s, we had the fall of the Berlin Wall, which caused a massive economic and social revolution within the Soviet Republic. So effectively it became Russia again. The consequence of that is it really opened up the trade with the West with respect to gas and oil. And that's the major events that I would like to capture by playing this series. Now, I know it's a tall order, but I really believe it is possible, and I think it could be fun to actually do the series. And now the next thing I want to explain is why this is actually an irregular series. And the reason for that is that when you start very early, the pace of the game is very slow. So in the beginning, this is not going to be a blow-by-blow account of how the economy is growing. What it will start with is videos on major changes and then a certain amount of play off camera, and then I'll come back again. But of course, once we get up into the 40s and 50s, then it will take on the shape of a more normal let's play where we'll be building the economy. And I think just to wind up this section, I want to emphasize that in the beginning of this series, the focus is very much going to be on self-sufficiency, and in order to be able to do that, we're going to have to move outside the normal game mechanic. I think that's enough of an introduction, so let's just click on new game, and you can see we're going to be playing on Four Corners 1908. This is a custom map I've created. It's a populated map, and the reason I created a custom map was simply down to the fact that after going through all the various maps I had available to start on, I didn't find anyone that really fitted well with the an early start that I wanted to do, and also the vision of what I wanted to do with the series. So we're going to play on this map, and we're just going to click on here, and as you can see here, it is a populated map, but what I want to emphasize is this population is too big for the start. So what I'm going to do is just take it down to about there. I think that should give me about 150 workers, which is the size of the starting location. This will make sense when we get actually onto the map. Of course, we're going to be playing on hard mode, always day, because of course we're recording this for YouTube. We're going to have a yearly start of 1960, although it doesn't really make that much difference, simply because we're going to be changing the date to 1908 anyway. Global events we're going to enable. Now, I've got a bit of a problem with money because, as I've already mentioned, this is going to be very much a role-playing series with a focus on self-sufficiency. So technically, in the early part of the game, money isn't going to be that important. But at the same time, we're going to have to buy templates very early on. And I'm just wondering whether the million rubles is going to be enough. And maybe I should go to medium just to ensure things go well. And we're going to go hard, I think. I mean, if push comes to shove, we're just going to have to borrow money. And then that will add another dimension to the series. So we're on. So effectively what we got now is, so we got everything set up. We got the difficulty hard. Just want to make sure everything is set up correctly. Okay, and I'm just going to click start game. Now, while the game's loaded, I'm just going to talk about what I'm going to be doing. As soon as we get onto the map, I'm going to pause it, and then I'm going to have to quit out of the game to change the start date to 1908. Welcome back. You can see the date is now the 19th of March 1908, so we're ready to go. In this section's going to consist of 3 parts. The first part, I will give you a map tour. If you want to know more detail about the map, there is a separate video where I go into more of the reasons for why things are on the map and the way they are. The second part, I will go over the starting location for the series. And then the third part, I'll just talk very briefly about the rules and objectives of the series, where I can actually show you some of the mechanics that we're going to be using. Probably the best way to start with the map tour is to explain why it's actually called 4 corners. And the reason is that the start location is down in the bottom left hand corner here, and we'll just fly in there just to show you the position. You can see it consists of a trading post over here in a village, but I'll go into more detail of this later on. And then we've got this little mud road that runs up to 3 very small villages up here. And if you're going to play the series, be aware that there are some population in here that you're going to gather together to put into your starter village. There's another little village here. Now, originally this was going to be the starting location, but eventually I went down to the left-hand corner, and then there's another little village up here. It's just to put a little bit of character on the map. Over here, there is a large customs post, and for the time, it's not historically correct. I think by the time we get up to here, we'll be far enough advanced with the date for these buildings to be in context. And then coming out of here is a wood railway which runs all the way down across the center of the map to what you could call as the bottom right hand corner. Now this is intended to represent the Trans-Siberian Railway. It could be any long distance railway. But be aware that I've actually broken the track here just to make it a little bit more interesting. Not that it's particularly relevant to the 1908 start, because trains are very rare until I think the mid 1920s. So it's not much point aiming to building a sophisticated rail network, although I will admit that getting some form of rail network will be a little bit of a priority. Now, while we're down in this corner, if I come over this way, I'll show you the only electrical connection to the outside world. And you can see here it goes to NATO, it doesn't go to the Soviet Republic. The idea of this connection is that we'll be able to export power when we get to the 1980s, because in 1908 there was no such thing as a national grid. I don't think anywhere in the world. I think even in the UK there wasn't a proper national grid until the kind of mid 60s. So one of the challenges of this series is going to be generating our own local power. Now up at the top right hand corner, which is effectively the 4th corner, what we have here is our only land NATO connection. And again, this is tucked up in this corner to represent the late game trade for, say, from the 1980s onwards, when the Berlin Wall falls. So that has been very much laid out with that, from that perspective. Probably the best way now is just to go on to the resources, and I'm going to do them in the reverse order. And the bauxite is in the middle along with the uranium. In 1908, bauxite would have been a rare element, or the aluminium would be, because the high levels of power needed to actually refine it. And then, of course, the same with uranium. The uranium doesn't really come into it anything of any significance until the 1950s. Oil was a bit of a problem, and you can see I've put a lot on the map. The reason for this is that once we get to the 1980s, I would like to create an oil industry that reflects the current Russian economy, which is very heavy on gas and oil. And I think that could be quite a fun thing to put together. But if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see there's some little patches there just to assist the starter economy. And that applies also to coal and iron. The starter economy, to be relatively successful, needs a little bit of a leg up. Otherwise, what we'll be doing is just running a very small farming community for about 30 or 40 gameplays, and that'd be incredibly boring. And you can see the iron actually copies the template that was given by the random map generation. And what I've done is I've just kind of enhanced it down in this bottom corner a little bit so that we can do some very low level mining. In fact, I'll just show you here. So we come to the iron mine, and I think if we go around here, you'll see that it's going to be a bit difficult to see, because of the amount that's here is going to be very, very small. So, I mean, that gives you an idea of how small the mines are going to be here. And so that also applies to the coal industry. I think there's a little bit more to do with the coal here. You can see we can get 28% mine here for coal, but of course the real source of coal is in the center. That is probably enough of a map tour. As I say, if you want more detail, feel free to check out the video that I made covering the custom map. And this is going to be our starting location, and you can see it consists of two parts. On the right hand side here, we've got a little trading station that I put together just for the sense of role playing. And of course, this is going to be our starter village. It's actually called New Hope. But we're going to start with the trading station. Probably the best way to describe this is when I was putting the concept of the role play together, I wanted to emphasize the remoteness of the village, and so I didn't want to bring a rail track in or a road into here. So the idea is that the goods that will be available in the custom shed here will be effectively being brought in by ship. This is a valid wharf which could be used for ships. But what I will say is that in 1908, the only ship I've found so far, bearing in mind that I'm recording this in August 2021 and mods are always being constantly added, was a ship called a Clyde Puffer. This is a very small cargo ship that supplied the small communities and islands up around Scotland in this time period. Therefore, that actually presents a problem because it doesn't carry fuel. So the only way you could get fuel in here to get the ship to run is to actually auto purchase, which is something that I don't want to do. So this is purely cosmetic. And if I show you here, this is the trader's house. You can see this area is called North Cape Trading. And I put a couple of little houses in here just for a flavor. And of course, the first thing we're going to be doing is moving these to the village. And the other thing we've also put in here is a wagon depot. The reason for this wagon depot is that so that the villagers to start with are going to have to purchase their wagons from the trader, but eventually we will be building our own. Of course, it's got no power because we got no external power connection. And if we come over to New Hope, now this is not just a normal to vault populated village with a few buildings on it. I have put some mods in here, so if you do want to play along with my series using this map, be aware that when you subscribe to the map, you're going to need to subscribe to certain mods. That will all be listed in the Steam entry for the map. Probably the best way to come around is if I start here, when we're I'll show you the cosmetic of the village first, and then we'll get into the detail, which will then wind the video up. What I wanted to do here was create a realistic looking village. So we've got the church in here because, of course, the Orthodox religion would have been very strong in Russia in 1908, and quite common with most villages. I mean, even here in the UK, most small villages have what would be called the priest's house. And so I put a priest's house in here for 25, and then for role-playing purposes, as the player, I'm playing as the village landlord or headman, we want to call it. And of course, as we go forward, we'll change from headman to commissars to various other roles. But so, and I thought it'd be really nice just to add a little landlord's house here. We've got two fairly large buildings here, which will accommodate quite a few people. And then we got various other small little buildings kind of dotted around. But now this layout here actually comes from Novu's Siberia 1910 start. He put this little combination of a shop and a barn, and I think every village would start with a barn, and that's what I wanted to do. And then what we got here is a New Hope bakehouse, and what you'll see is this bakehouse is a really new mod as of July 2021. It actually needs crops and wood, and I think this is a good point to emphasize that starting in 1908, the two dominant products are crops and wood, and these are going to be the two areas where we're going to need to get self-sufficiency pretty quickly, because technically if we can get a pile of crops and a pile of wood, we can get self-sufficient that way. Now moving on, down here we've got a horse feeding station, which is the horse-drawn vehicle equivalent of a gas station. Again, this is something that Novu's done to make things a little bit more realistic. So technically we don't have to even import fuel. What we got to do, again, it returns back to the fact we're going to need plenty of crops to get this going. And the way it works is that the wagons will go in here, and then when they will fill up with from the crops and not fuel. So fuel is not an immediate essential with this start. Just to add a little bit of realism and a little bit of flexibility, as I say, we got the barn here, which isn't a massive capability. I think the full capacity is only about 180 tons. But what I've also done is put in 3 little silos here, and each one's got 50 tons in, feeding into these areas here. And I've just put one over here more for balance, and also because if you see here, we've actually got some fields. We've got actually the possibility of a harvest in the first year of, I think it's 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, 140 tons. One thing you will notice is that there is actually no farm, because what we're going to be trying to do is see if we can plant the fields and harvest the fields without a farm. So this is very much an experiment, although I will be upfront and say that I do know that the mechanic does work, because I've actually tested it in my 7 Crosses series. Once we unpause the game, what I'm hoping is that the first thing our residents are going to do is get out here and start sowing these fields, and I think they will do. Now the next thing we need to talk about is power, and just for the starting purposes, because we can't run external power in, I've built 2 windmills, and these 2 windmills cover the entire village. I show you here. So that will mean that we've got power coverage from the beginning. Be aware these don't produce a lot of power, and they're also subject to the wind. So the power supply is going to be a little bit irregular. So another early priority is getting a little bit more of a stable power supply going. And of course we've got all the other buildings we're going to need to build to get this into a functioning workers and resources community, as opposed to functioning village of 1908. And of course that includes culture, education, sport, all the other things as well. But I have put this building down here for stables hand lodging, just for a bit of fun. Again, it's part of I can't remember which mod it is now. And of course I've also put in the tiny construction office here. For that reason, the only reason we need that $1 million for is to buy the initial wagons and get the economy up by buying food and buying the basic resources to get things up. So we're already at a low level bootstrap capability, and the $500 is, I'm hoping not to use that at all. So it's just going to sit there, and what we're going to do is focus purely on the 1 million rubles. And this is the reason why I was kind of a bit indecisive when I was setting the game up, whether to go for 1 million rubles or 3.5 million rubles. And of course the dollars were just going to ignore, as far as they don't exist. I mean, I could wipe them out using cheat mode, but I think we're just going to leave them there, because we may need to create a template or something to build something that is completely missing. Because one of the problems with this start is vehicles can be incredibly short supply, and what we may have to do is possibly buy or build, I don't know whether we're able to build it, some Western vehicles to simulate them being coming in. And of course we got that opportunity until 1923, because in this time period Some Western vehicles would have been imported into Russia. So I think this would be a good point to stop. Otherwise, the video will be too long. And then in part one, we're going to unpause the game and get down into some serious gameplay. And hopefully things are going to go well. So until next time, whatever you do, enjoy your gaming.